The last time we had domestic violence, we learned that domestic violence is rooted in power and control. Okay, the soil of domestic violence is power and control. We've also learned that domestic violence is a pattern of controlling behavior over another person through fear. Maybe in the near future, we're going to be focusing on power, control, and fear alone, because we don't have enough time tonight to talk about power, control, and fear, because those three there is a vehicle and as a motivator of domestic violence. And we can't really leave those three out of these workshops because of the time. We don't have the time. So maybe we can focus on those three further down the track. And also we learned from our last event that domestic violence is a life-threatening crime affecting all people. It doesn't matter if you're female or male, because sometimes as men, we normally hear about, when we hear domestic violence, we always refer to men, right? It's always the male. It not only happens to the female, but it happens also to a male. Okay, so regardless if you're male or female, it doesn't matter the age, the young or old, doesn't matter what religion you come from, it will happen. It might happen to you. So, and I'm sure those who are watching right now that are experienced domestic violence. We also learned that domestic violence that comes in different types of form. Like the obvious one, the one that we normally hear about is the physical abuse, right? So we've learned that domestic violence is many forms. One of them is the physical form. That's the obvious one that we normally hear about, right? The second one we hear it now and then is a sexual form. So you have the sexual form, and then you have the spiritual form, and then you have the social form, the financial form, and then you have one we normally don't hear about is the emotional abuse, the emotional form. Now, all of this form what we call domestic violence, because domestic violence is not just one part, it's not just the physical form, it's all of these elements that forms domestic violence. So, and the one that we normally don't hear about is that big one that says emotional abuse. That's the one that we normally don't hear about. Or sometimes we hear about it, but we don't know what it is, the emotional abuse. So doing these workshops, we're gonna focus and we're gonna zoom in to one particular area of domestic violence with emotional abuse. If we can have a better understanding of what emotional abuse is by focusing on one particular area, then we will have the awareness. And we know there's a saying, there's knowledge. When you have knowledge, power is knowledge, right? And when we have power because of knowledge and the awareness, then we will be able to work through challenges in life as they arise. Now, notice I did not say that we're going to be perfect as men. Notice I did not say that we're not going to go through stuff. But I did say that we will have power because of knowledge. And once we gain that, then we will be able to work through challenges in life as they arise. But tonight, we're going to focus on emotional abuse. Now, emotional abuse is the word that we don't hear about, right? We don't normally hear about the word abuse, because no one wakes up in the morning and you don't hear people, or you don't hear men talk about, I feel abuse. I mean, that's the last thing you want to talk about. I mean, we're not vulnerable enough, okay? So we don't hear the word abuse, and no one wants to experience this thing called emotional abuse. I don't know about you, but I don't want to experience that. No one in here, all of us are sitting in this room and people are watching, no one wants to go through emotional abuse, but it happens. It happens. I found a research and it says there are millions of people around the world struggle to maintain self-worth because of emotional abuse. And then let me say that again. Millions of people, men and women and children around the world struggle to maintain self-worth because of emotional abuse. If you go through emotional abuse, what happens? It destroys your self-worth. And when your self-worth is being destroyed, guess what happens is you feel the emptiness. Have you ever felt that before? I have. You feel the emptiness. And because of the emptiness leads to shame and guilt. And then from shame and guilt, it leads to depression. And if you don't know how to deal with the depression, it might lead to major depression. And if you don't deal with that major depression, it's going to lead to suicide thoughts. And if you don't deal with suicide thoughts, it will lead to suicide. Can you see the chain? So we can't just focus. If you're going to focus on depression, you can't just tackle depression. You got to look at the root cause of depression. But back to my point again, there are millions of people today, men and women, struggle to maintain self-worth is because of emotional abuse. Now the big question now, okay, this is the open conversation, okay? The big question now, what is emotional abuse? One definition of emotional abuse is that emotional abuse is any behavior or actions taken against you that devalues you in any way. Repeat that again. Is that any behavior or action that is taken against you that devalues you in any way. Okay? So if you look at the two words there, you have the word action and behavior. The action and the behavior and action are two different things. So I want to use Kiala for example. So see if you can pick up the behavior and action. Okay? So my behavior and action, see if you can pick it up. What's my behavior? So behavior is the way you act, but the action is the act of doing something. Okay? So I'm going to do it again. So what's my behavior? Happy because of my smile, right? So what is the action? My action is giving the water, right? So my behavior by giving the water is kindness and happiness, right? So I'm joyful giving the water to Kiala. Now I'm gonna reframe that. I'm gonna change that now. So what's my behavior? So my behavior is the opposite now, right? Because now it's like, you see? So emotional abuse is any behavior or action that devalues someone. Okay? So in other words, any behavior and action that reduces the worth of someone. It can be a smile, or it can be like just by the looks. Have you ever met people in your life, like you can tell but what's in their mind just by looking at them? You know, they don't really have to say something, but it's their behavior that shows on how they're treating you. So emotional abuse, the one definition is any behavior or actions that is taking against someone that devalues that person. Now here's the second part. This is the second definition. Emotional abuse is any destructive behavior in a relationship or friendship or marriage where one person is constantly broken down by the other. Okay, so that's the second definition. But the third definition is this one here. Emotional abuse is the intention or unintentional harm done to another person in order to knowingly or unknowingly gain control over a person. I was in Melbourne. This is about 11 years ago. I was at my brother's wedding. And now before I tell the story, back in the days, back then, I was a victim of abuse. Verbal abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. I was a victim of all those three. 11, 12 years ago, we're in Melbourne at my brother's wedding. And the service, the wedding service was all good, was all nice. And then we went to take photos. When I came back to the photos, my wife, she said something that I did not like. Now remember, I was a victim. Now, when you become a victim, you will turn out to be an abuser. I was an abuser, okay? I was a victim and I became the abuser to my wife. Anyway, after the photos, we came back and my wife mentioned something I did not like. So I went off. I said, you better be quiet. You better shut up before you know what's going to happen to you. So anyway, but she didn't say anything. She just keep going and keep going and keep going. You know when your wife or your partner keeps nagging, they keep pushing your button. So I stood up, and she know what I'm like. If she sees me like standing up, it's all over. So when I stood up, I said, look, I'm gonna warn you. If you don't shut your mouth, you know exactly what's gonna happen. And just before she walked out, she said something that kind of like stabbed me in the heart. Okay, I'm not gonna mention it tonight, okay? But she said something really hurtful that kind of like, just made me more angry. And then she walked straight out. Now, as an abuser, you always want to have the last saying. Okay, I don't know if you can relate with me, but as an abuser, you don't like to lose. Okay, you always like to have the last saying. She walked out, and then in my mind, it's like, she's winning. Like, I'm getting angry. I didn't have the last saying. Down, and 5 minutes later, I sat there and I'm like, no, I have to win. I stood out and I walked out. Now, when I came out, she was standing outside the car park. And I said to her, look, what you said in there, it wasn't nice. And so she played the silent treatment on me. But you know when they play a silent treatment on an abuser? And the abuser don't like that, right? We don't like it. I didn't like it. It went worse. So I said, talk to me right now. If you don't talk to me, I guarantee I'm gonna make some noises here, you know? But she didn't say anything. The more she went silent on me, the more frustrated I was. And my voice just got louder and louder and louder. And it says here, the intention or the intentional harm done to another. I said to myself, the only way for me to control this woman, for me to win, is to take something that she loves the most. Now, my son was only 2 years old. She was holding my son. And I know straight away, if I take my son away from her arms, I will win. And that's exactly what I did. I took my son and I walked out. 5 minutes later, she followed me. You know, today, she's still scarred. The memory is still there. Now, I'm not saying that I'm the same as before. I'm not saying that I'm the same before. No, the change, and I praise God for that. The change is done. I still have a lot to work on. I still have a lot to work on as the abuser. But I'm not the same as before. But today, every day, every week, those memories keeps popping up in her head. And I have to live with that for the rest of my life, you know. And I still have to remind her, no, that was me before. That was the man that I did not know before. I'm a new person now. What does emotional abuse look like? Because you can tell someone that is being through physical abuse, right? We can tell someone that is being through physical abuse by the marks or, you know, the black eye or the cut lip. But the emotional abuse is difficult to tell because the marks and the cut is not external, it's not outside, it's the internal. You can tell someone that is being physical abuse because the wounds on the outside. But the emotional abuse, you can't see the wounds that is inside the heart. And that's what kills. Is because we don't see the wounds that is sitting inside of that person's heart. So the question we're going to ask you now is, what are the signs of emotional abuse? What do you think? What are your thoughts? What are the signs? What does emotional abuse look like? What are the signs? What are the behaviors? What does it look like? Controlling your partner's time, space, money, thought, or choices such as what they wear. Can you see, brother? Yeah. So that's another sign. It's controlling your partner's time. So that's the first one. The next one is that making a child feel different from other family members. I don't know about you, but I'm glad that I grew up in a family that were all equal. I'm glad for that, okay? And it may be different from those who are watching, okay? So making a child feel different from other family members. Here's another one. Continuing ignoring the child. I think when my son was about, I think when he was 7. Every time he comes home, you know, he wanted to get my attention, but because I was so busy at work, busy doing other stuff, I keep ignoring him. I knew I was ignoring him, but I keep going. And when I found this out, I kind of like went to my son. I had to apologize to him, so say sorry for ignoring you all these years. I did it on purpose. Now it'll be different if you don't know what you're doing. Okay, it'll be different because, you know, it depends the awareness of what you have of emotional abuse. Okay. The next one is isolating your partner by not letting them see or talk to others. I don't know if you do that to your wife or your partner, but I think it's the other way around. It's more like them to us, right? Okay, so that's another one. The other one is, what about this one? Making all of the decision without your partner's input or consideration of their needs. Now that's a massive one for me. As an islander, we use the, there's a saying that you are the head of the family, okay? And because we are the head of the family, we abuse that system and we make all the choices without letting our wives know. So it's pretty much when it comes to family stuff, when mom and dad ring, especially back in, I think about, we've been married now for 16 years, but I remember about 12, 13 years ago, every time my mom and dad ring for something, for money, I would just say, yes, I'll be there, I'll give it, whatever amount it is, without talking to my wife. So here it says making all of the decision without your partner's input or consideration of their needs. That's emotional abuse, believe it or not. I don't know if you can relate to that, but always one of them. Okay, here's another one. What does it look like? Accusing your partners of flirting, having an affair, or being unfaithful when there is little or no evidence they have done so. Have you been there before? They say, oh, you're cheating. Who are you talking to? Who are you on your phone with, right? But see, that's another one. Okay, here's another one. I'm just gonna go through the list. Intimidating your partner by making them afraid, including breaking things, punching walls, slamming doors, or throwing objects. I'm the number one of that. I used to do that a lot, okay, with my wife. Okay, because I can't get my way. Therefore, I just, banging stuff or throwing things around or, slamming doors or putting holes at the wall of the house. Okay, that's emotional abuse. The next one here is threatening to hurt yourself, especially when things are not going your way. I remember one day I came after work. My wife said something that I did not like, and I couldn't control the situation. I lost control. I used to control people, especially my wife. I'm not the same anymore, okay? But I'm talking about before. I used to, control everything around my family, especially my wife. And I remember one night, because I couldn't gain control, I used suicide. I used to wrap the rope around my neck. Now, in my mind, I didn't want to do it, okay? I was just playing mind games to kind of like control her, just to listen to what I have to say. And I used to do that often in my life. And I can look back now and I wonder why she pulls away from me. Okay, especially the emotion, especially the love, the affection. Sometimes she pulls away from me, and I always ask her, why do you always, pull away from me? And she explained to me, because all these years, you have damaged everything here of my mind on how to love you. It's because one of them is threatening her by hurting myself because I couldn't gain control over her life or over the family. Here's another one. Demeaning your partner with frequent put downs, name calling, blame, or humiliation. Okay, that's a massive one. The next one here is saying things that are designed to make your partner feel crazy or stupid. Have you ever experienced that before? I know I've done it a lot. Okay, it's making them, you're making them feel stupid or crazy, even when you're wrong, especially when you're wrong. Especially when I'm wrong, I kind of like twist, like manipulation, twist to make like she's the bad guy and I'm the good guy. Okay. The other one here is the always being right, never apologizing. Okay, that's the common one. This is a good one. Punishing your partner by refusing to talk to them or by withholding affection. Normally we withhold 6 or they withhold 6. I know you're laughing.
To work with, we try to withhold. Doesn't have the same effect.
And it's funny you mention it because I was doing this and my wife came, she saw that. It's just like, really? I'm like, yeah, I know. I don't agree with that too. Like, I'm trying to get 6 from you. But you're so right, eh? I mean, it happens to some people, but especially in the island culture, I don't think so. For us too, that's why I really believe in the awareness of mental health, or the topics that we've been doing, the emotional abuse, the domestic violence. It's just educating. We call it true education, because at school you don't really learn about these stuff, and when you get into the marriage, you're trying to do this marriage, you're trying to do this relationship, not knowing, okay, how far can I go? What is emotional abuse? It's because we didn't know better, and we can't always blame the generation before us. It's because they didn't know better too, but because of the awareness and the tools that we have today, we can do something about it. Yeah, and it's never too late. It's never too late. I mean, I can think back now, my dad, he was a strict man, and I'm sure some of you guys can relate to that. Really hard man, and they're not sorry for anything. And if you're trying to talk to them, good luck. If you're not fast enough, okay, the stone or the rock will be on your head, But I think last year, the Christmas, not last year, but the year before, I went down to Melbourne, and I spoke to my dad for the first time. For the first time, I sat down with my dad, and I just like, Dad, let's just put away your title, as a pastor. I just want to talk to you from a son to a father, and a father to a son, and I lay out everything. I says, Dad, all these years, I'm longing for your love. I'm longing for your affection. I'm longing you to say those words. Dad, son, I'm proud of you. Son, I love you. Because when I met my wife's family, they were like kissing each other and hugging each other, and I'm standing like, what a weird family. Like for me, like in my mind, like I'm standing, these people like, eating together, because our dinner table as islanders, it's dead silent. You don't just eat, look at, you don't say anything, and it's a quietest time. And so growing up, I was like, in my mind, okay, that's how you do life, And I just passed down, to my son, and I'm working for my son right now. I'm glad too there's only like a small group tonight, because I think sometimes when there's too many people, you lose to kind of like, to sit back and reflect. Because sometimes when you have a silent moment, I know it feels weird, but it's good to have that silent moment to think again, because doing this topic, we don't want to, just pass through it. Otherwise, we're not learning anything. But it's good to have like a small group like this. We can actually take time, to process things and to reflect on it. And again, the motives of tonight is not to bring these things to abuse you and just to kind of like say, oh wow, you did this. That's not the goal tonight. The goal tonight is to bring the awareness, and so we can deal with it, okay? So we can attack it and heal it. Because the last thing we want to do is bring this back, maybe something that you went through as a childhood, and the last thing for us is bring it up and not doing anything about it, okay? So tonight is just bringing the awareness so we can understand how to deal with it. Okay, so all of that, okay, so in any form, abuse is destructive, okay? Abuse, any kind of abuse is destructive. Emotional abuse has been proven to be one of the most damaging type of abuse long term. Okay, let me just repeat that again. Emotional abuse has been proven to be one of the most damaging type of abuse long term. One study I think is, I can't remember the name, is the World Health Organization in California. Okay, they've done this massive study. They got the survivor from a physical abuse and the survivor from emotional abuse, and they compare the both. And years after the abuse, the emotional abuse caused lasting damage. Okay, so the physical abuse, I think it took them about, a month to heal because of the wounds, but the emotional abuse The study says that sometimes it lasts about 15 to 20 years, the damage. Can you see we think it's the physical abuse that lasts long, right? But that's just the emotional abuse. Because remember, the emotional abuse, you cannot see from the outside. The emotional abuse is you carry from the inside, your childhood, maybe from childhood, then grow up to meet your partner, your girlfriend, and you move on from your girlfriend to your marriage, and then later down the track, things have started happening in your life, and sometimes you're asking the question, why am I like this? It's because again, it's that hurt, and it's that darkness and that brokenness, the wound that you're carrying in your heart for all these years. So there's a saying, I wrote this down, I'm almost done, but the power of life and death is in the tongue. Have you heard this before? I'm sure some of you heard before. The power of life and death, it depends on what you say. Because remember, emotional abuse can be also words. About 6 years ago, I was in Auckland, doing some workshop in Auckland. And after one workshop, a lady came up and grabbed me by the hand and said, look, I really want you to come with me tomorrow to visit this man in Auckland Hospital. So the next day we went together and we met this man. He's about 62 years. And as we started talking and sharing, tears just coming down. Tears just coming down. And I was sharing with him the very things I'm talking about, mental health and from childhood and emotional abuse, verbal abuse. The man just could not hold his tears. It's just running down, and I gave him kind of a silent, moment to let him cry. And 5 minutes later, he whispered to my ear. He said, "Brother, all these years, he's dealing with major depression. He cannot go a day without medication because of major depression, anxiety, and he keeps shaking all the time." And he said, for the first time, he now understood all these years he was suffering from childhood experience. And one of them, he said, is the way his father spoke to him. And some of the words were like, you're not good enough. You'll never be good enough. Why can't you be like your older brother? Why can't you be like your older cousins? You're useless, you're dumb, you're good for nothing. And he said, all these years as a child, growing up, he's being holding that all these years, 62 years of age, and came to an understanding that he's not a victim of his past experience. And I said, man, it's never too late. He said he found his healing, going back and face the pain from what he used, from the words of his father. And he told me something there. He went back and spoke to his father for the first time for, I think, 20 years. He forgave his father. And I told him, what was his reaction? Speechless. The father didn't know what to say. Just tears, didn't know how to handle, didn't know how to react to his son coming back and forgave him for all these years. Isn't it amazing, huh? The power of life and death, it depends on the words that comes out of our mouth. What are the effects? What do you think the effects of emotional abuse? So you have the short-term effects is confusion. I used to have a lot of that, growing up, because I was emotional abuse, okay? And the other one is fear. The next one is hopelessness and shame. The shame is the massive one. That's another topic itself that that needs to be unpacked because of emotional abuse. But not only that, you have also this emotional toll can also result in a behavioral or physical side effects. One of them is difficulty concentrating. When you read something and you have to keep reading to understand it. Right? Because of emotional abuse, the short-term effect. And then the next one you have is moodiness. That's a massive one for females, okay? This one here is muscle tension. Have you ever experienced that before? Somehow you wake up in the morning, go, oh, you sore, right? Because sometimes the effect of emotion, not always, but it can lead to muscle tension. Now I put this one here because it's an experience I went through, nightmares. My son, I think was about 5 years ago, he will wake up in the morning about roughly 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, roughly the same time, screaming for 1 year straight, screaming and yelling, and then he goes back to sleep. And I remember one night, started screaming, and I went to his room. I didn't wake him up, but I sat there. I just wanted to listen to what's coming out of his mouth. And I was listening. I was just listening. He was screaming, and then I heard him saying, "Dad, because stop, Dad, stop, please, Dad, please." And that right there cut me in half. The very next day, I went inside. I didn't know how to talk to my son. I went to my wife, and so we went through, the side effect of why kids have nightmares, and one of them was emotional abuse. And I didn't realize that I was doing this to my son all these years, and that's the side effects. I sat him down, I apologized to him, and now it's been 4 years now. He's never had a nightmare. So that's a good news. Good news, I was able to break cycles with my son. No, I wasn't afraid to put up my hand and say, "Son, I was wrong." Because I think sometimes fathers are so prideful to kind of go to their sons or go to their daughters and say, "Look, I was wrong." I had to take the first step and put up my hand and say, "Son, I was wrong. Please forgive me." And I worked through my son for the last 3 years now, or 4 years now, and he's never had a nightmare. So thank God for that. I had to put that there because it was killing me for the last 3 years of my life, with my son, going through and helping him with the nightmares he had. But I have to kind of put my hand and say, "Look, son, I will take the blame, and I will help you to fix this problem." My relationship with my son now is totally different the way it used to be before. We're hanging out more, we're laughing more, and just seeing Kiala and his daughter doing things together kind of motivate me too, doing TikTok together. It's a good thing to have. Now, the long-term effects are all of this. The low self-esteem, one of you mentioned it before. The depression, anxiety, and guilt. So that's the long-term effects. And then now brings me now to our last question. Can we do something about emotional abuse? That's the question. Can we do something about it? Yes, we can. There's hope for emotional abuse. But in order for us to deal with emotional abuse, again, we got to reason from the root, find the root cause. And that's why don't miss, for those who are watching, don't miss the 27th of April. Okay, we're going to go deep on root cause. What are some of the root causes of emotional abuse? Now, what do you think? What are the root causes? What do you think? Traumatic event. Okay, yep. Okay, cool. Now, I only got 4, okay? There's a lot, okay, but I'm just going to focus on 4. One of them is, I'm going to add onto the list that you have, okay? So one of them is emotional abuse may be rooted in childhood. As some of you said, it's a childhood experience, right? So emotional abuse can be rooted in childhood. Abuse is a learned behavior, okay? Abuse is something that we learn, because no one wakes up in the morning and makes a conscious decision to start acting abusively without any idea of what it looks like, right? We don't wake up in the morning and okay, I'm gonna be abusive today, okay? Abuse is a behavior that is learned. So if a child continues to see mom and dad verbally abuse each other, that child is going to turn out to believe and accept the fact that this is what a normal romantic relationship look like. Okay? Now, it's not too late to change that. There's hope, but we're talking about the root causes, some of the root causes of emotional abuse. One of them is emotional abuse may be rooted in childhood. It's an abuse that is a behavior that has been learned. Okay, it's a learned behavior.
You mean you can change what happened?
So what I'm saying is, can you change what happened in the past? We can't, right? But what about today? Can we reframe that today? We can do something. That's hope, right? Okay, so that's good. So we can reverse it. In other words, we can reverse it, not to change the past, because we can't change the circumstances, but we can change on how we reacted today, right? Okay, the second one is that emotional abuse may be rooted in low self-esteem. Okay, it may be, is rooted in low self-esteem. A person who has a low self-esteem, they often don't like to think about themselves. When they have that low self-esteem, they don't like to think about themselves. So when the negative thoughts that comes through reflection are painful, they're really painful. So one of the many ways for them to avoid thinking about oneself is to find faults in others or to create arguments, right? Because of the low self-esteem, because they can't handle the information, they can't handle the painful information that is coming from the outside world and the information that they've been through as childhood that create the low self-esteem. Guess what happens? So what they do is to find fault in others and create arguments. I'm guilty of that too. You know, the root cause. And that's why it's so important to understand the root cause of emotional abuse. Now, there are many, but I'm just going through just 4 of them. Okay? And that's the second one. The third one, now this is a big one. The third one is that emotional abuse may be rooted in a person's genetic code. Do you have a familiar idea what a genetic code is? So it's a heavy topic, and I don't want to go deep into that because of the time. Now, technically, people who have genetic, maladies. What's the other word for maladies? Disorder? Okay, genetic abuse. So people who have genetic disorder, their aggressive and their abusive behavior are not intentionally abusive. Okay? Now, by saying that, just because they have a genetic disorder doesn't mean that they have the right to abuse other people. But there are ways, we're talking about people who have these genetic disorder, there are ways to help these people. Okay, we're not saying that there's no hope for them, but there are ways, and there are people that can teach and coach them to help them to restrain themselves and act in a more socially acceptable way. Just because you have a genetic problem or disorder, it doesn't mean that there is no hope for you, and then you have the right to keep abusing those people. No, we can help those people to change their behavior and coach the mind. Okay. So that's number 3, the root cause of emotional abuse. Genetic code is a massive topic, and tonight we don't have the time to do it. And the last one is that emotional abusive behavior can be increased by substance abuse. Now, what I mean by that, let me read something here. When a person is under the influence of drugs or alcohol, they don't behave the way they normally do. I know that because I was an alcoholic, and it takes one little can, you start acting the person that you normally don't act, right? I don't know if you can relate with me on that one. I'm putting my 2 hands and my legs out because I know what it's like. Okay, I know what it's like. So now let me read this. While substance abuse is not at the root of emotional abuse, it can increase a person's tendencies to act emotionally abusive. They found in the World Health Organization in California, I read an article, they found the research, and it's been proven, it takes one sip of alcohol to create brain damage. Now, believe it or not, but I did the research on it. Again, I came in an article. You take one sip of alcohol, what happens? It can damage brain cells. Now, brain cells, they have millions of them. Okay, you have motor neurons and all those stuff. And they say you take one sip one sip of alcohol, it can damage the cells of your brain. Now, when those cells becomes destroyed, guess what happened? You're not in the right frame of mind. That's why sometimes when you're drunk, you wake up in the morning, everyone's talking about you. Remember that night? You're like, what night? And because and the research says it takes one sip of alcohol that creates brain damage. And when you're not in the right frame of mind, guess what happens? You become aggressive. You get angry easily. You get moody easily. Especially when you get home, you get tired from work because we all work, right? And the last time you get home is your kids nagging at you and you're like, what? You start again because of the cells of your brain. And that's what it says here. One of the root causes of emotional abuse, it can come from what we take and what we put in our bodies, especially alcohol and drugs. Now, it's none of my business. For those who are watching, it's none of my business to tell you to stop drinking, stop doing drugs. No, it's none of my business. But, go study it yourself. What does alcohol, what does drug does to your cells to take you away from the mind that we were created to use properly for our families, our relationship, and our communities. The root causes of emotional abuse. Now here's an open question. I don't have answers for this, okay? We're gonna help each other to finish it, to wrap this up. How do you help someone then with emotional abuse? How can we help someone that is going through emotional abuse? So be there for them, make yourself available, pretty much, right? Okay, that's a good one, right? Because I think sometimes when we put up our hand, okay, I'm gonna be there for you, but when they text you, when they make that phone call to you, you're not available, because sometimes we say things, and sometimes I'm in trouble on it. Sometimes I'm like, yeah, I'm there, but then when it comes to the time to get your hands dirty, you're not available for that person. I think we have to be really serious on helping someone. Okay, that's a good one. Okay, any other solutions? Got to look at the mirror. Yeah, that's a big one. That's why I'm more vulnerable of sharing my own stories, because I took that first step. I look at the mirror and I say, look, I need to deal with me, because I can't help someone if I can't help myself. You can't give something that you don't have. I think that's a good step. Is look at the mirror and say, look, I need the coach. I need the help. I need to find people, to be around with. So number one is, what did you say again? Guiding by finding someone, right? Being available. And number two is look at yourself. Let's look for two more. Awareness. The love, right? The love the higher love, right? The love that sometimes we miss that from our childhood experience, right? We've been looking at the different type of love, and some of us, and because the love is not there in the home, there's a hole inside of your heart, right? Emptiness. And so therefore we look for satisfaction everywhere, trying to fill that hole because of missing of that love, the awareness of what love looks like. Like that. Beautiful. So what? Make yourself available. Guidance, right? And what was the second one? Look at yourself, start with you. And then we experience finding the love, right? And finding true love. Because again, there are so many love out there that only fills the emptiness of your heart, but it only lasts for a little bit. And again, thank you for the inputs. And thank you also, Father, for the last part of bringing solution. We came up with 4 points of bringing the guidance, right? Making yourself available. And then, the second solution is be honest with yourself. Look at the mirror and, put up your hand, look, I'm going to work on myself. Okay, because you can't give something that you don't have. And then the third solution is bringing in just understanding the awareness of the true love that heals the broken heart. There is power in a story. There's a power in testimony. So we continue to share our story with men and with those who are going through emotional abuse, that help them to bring healing and bring hope that they're looking for. So for those who are joining us from online and watching right now, thank you for joining us and hope to see you soon.